Today, as always, we will take you to the limit of skepticism, of what you decide to believe, or what your experiences dictate. That's how it is, community. Today's stories will be about legends, strange beings, creatures that we believe or want to believe do not exist. But what is impossible for you is someone else's experience. We hope you can enjoy these stories in good humor, that you are ready to listen, and that you have the opportunity to turn off the lights, because you are now entering the world of tales of the night. Hello, Uriel. I share this little story with you anonymously, as requested. I usually listen to your stories while I work, mostly at home. I listen from a small device shaped like a ball, with touch sensors to raise and lower the volume or to skip and play just by touching it. I mention this because the experience seemed to begin when I heard stories related to elves, fairies in a garden. I hadn't noticed this until I saw a post in the Tales of the Night community Facebook group where someone commented that if you listen to certain stories at high volume, not with headphones, those beings can get riled up. That's when I realized that all the strange things happening at home started after I listened to the Cuautitlan Elves episode. I remembered that while listening to it, the volume kept going up and down as if someone was moving my device, but it wasn't malfunctioning, because I could even hear the little sound it makes when someone touches it, although there was no one else at home but me. Then out of nowhere, the story cut off and music started playing, but I didn't want to give it more importance than a small electronic device malfunction should have. Anyway, I told my siblings about it and they made fun of me. They just told me that my device was bewitched. And that was one of the reasons why I didn't share it with you all, why I decided to act as if nothing had happened. But the story doesn't end there. Last weekend I went with my family to a small town in the state of Hidalgo, where beliefs and stories about elves abound. Everything was going normally until we entered a museum dedicated to these beings, and someone approached me directly, ignoring my family. "Do you have one with you?" I thought I hadn't heard correctly, but she repeated it. "You? Do you have a mischievous one with you?" I was very confused. The only thing I had to do was leave candies and some coins as an offering for those beings, as this person recommended. Outside the place, we also met a group of bikers, and one of them, already elderly, told us a little story explaining why they were there. He told us that they believe in the beings that live on the roads, that, a long time ago, one of them, a lone motorcyclist who was traveling, had an accident. They say it was caused by them, by the road elves. He fell badly injured and saw several of these beings approaching, wanting to steal his saddlebags. So he started throwing at them all the objects he could. Everything he found, everything he had in his backpack. Until the last thing he had left was a small metal bell. When he took it to throw it, the bell rang and he saw that they didn't like it. They started to move away. Finally, they left him alone. Since then, when traveling on the road, he carries a bell tied to his motorcycle and shares them with anyone he meets traveling alone. The biker showed us his, the one that had been given to him. And for some reason, after finishing his story, he gave me that little bell. He told me to put it on my car, in a place where it could ring as I drove down the road. And although I don't want to believe it so much, without hesitation, I placed it on the lower part of the rear bumper. I know very well that this is not a horror story, or a macabre one, like the ones you usually tell. But I decided to share it because of the interesting nature of that conversation, because of what they told me in that little town full of elf stories. And it's strange, but when I'm on the road, if I lower the volume of my music and pay attention, I can hear the tinkling of the little bell. Hello, community. I hope you are all well. I want to share this story that came to me, now that sadly my great-grandmother passed away a few days ago. This happened to her. My great-grandmother died at 99 years old, from natural causes. She lived her whole life in Naucalpan, Estado de Mexico, very close to the Las Minas neighborhood. She lived in the same house since she was little, around 5 years old. Her house is like a tenant house. There are different rooms around a courtyard, and the bathroom is across this courtyard. When I was about 10 years old, my great-grandmother told me this story for the first time, something that happened when she was 15, when she reached a point where she had a very hard time sleeping at night, and would get up in the early morning to walk through the courtyard of her house, which was fenced and had a hallway. One of those nights, she took a chair and brought it out to the courtyard to sit while she got sleepy. She was only illuminated by the moonlight. Suddenly, she saw something. The silhouette of a very tall, thin man, standing at the gate. She got up immediately and walked towards him, thinking it was the shadow of some object creating an optical illusion. But the closer she got, the clearer she saw him. Then she saw him perfectly well. It was a man. He was staring at her and suddenly smiled at her. She told me that she entered a kind of trance and doesn't remember anything else. After about 2 hours, fortunately, one of her sisters got up to go to the bathroom. She was crossing the courtyard to go there when she found my great-grandmother passed out at the entrance to the hallway. She yelled for her mother and other sister, who immediately came to help her. They took her to her room. At that time, only women lived in that house, since her father had died in a bicycle accident years earlier. When they checked on my great-grandmother, they noticed she had some kind of mark on her neck, but they didn't know what had caused it. They tried to ignore it so as not to give in to fear. But from that day on, my great-grandmother went from having insomnia to being able to sleep perfectly every night. Although now, with a little detail, she became a sleepwalker. That is, at night she would get up and go out to the courtyard, walking while asleep, not consciously. And when she woke up, she didn't remember how she had gotten there. And this happened to her about 3 times a week. Since her sisters slept in other rooms, they didn't notice that my great-grandmother was getting up and going out to the courtyard in the early morning. My great-grandmother then began to notice the appearance of more marks. They looked like bite marks, and now they were appearing in different parts of her body, on her arms, neck, ankles. But she never understood why she didn't tell her mother or sisters what was happening. It was as if something prevented her from doing so. Likewise, she began to experience fainting, fatigue, and drowsiness. She hardly ate. She began to have dreams about the person she saw that first night. That thing that looked like a man, but, in her dreams, appeared a little different, was a man of about 25 years old, very elegant, attractive, who would always enter her room. She described him as having very pale skin, tall brown hair, dark brown eyes, elegant, and with a very strong, very pleasant perfume smell that she couldn't stop smelling. In her dream, she would see him watching her sleep for a while, from the entrance to her room. Then he would approach her bed and start caressing her. First her face, then her hair. Then he would kiss her on the cheek. My great-grandmother felt very attracted to this man. It was as if she was in love with him, in love and obsessed at the same time. And as a form of telepathy, he, without saying a single word from his mouth, would tell her that he would take her to live with him, that it would only be a few more weeks before they could be together forever. And my great-grandmother would tell him yes, that she wanted to go, that she would be with him, that he should take her to live in his house. After having that dream, my great-grandmother would wake up in the courtyard, and without saying a word, she would go back to her room, trying to sleep. This happened every time, and during the day she couldn't stop thinking about that man. My great-grandmother said that she even felt like she was really in love. Even when she was conscious, when she knew she was awake, she could always smell that perfume in her room. All of this lasted approximately 2 months. One night, her mother got up to go to the bathroom and said that she looked toward the hallway and saw my young great-grandmother standing in the arms of a man, and he was kissing her neck. She, super angry, headed towards them thinking that my great-grandmother would secretly let him into the house in the early morning. When she got closer, she said she saw something she would never forget. The man was biting her neck. Her mother then yelled at her, "What are you doing?" And the man turned and she saw that fangs were coming out of his mouth. Fangs that seemed to have blood. She began yelling for her daughters to come out. She ran to her room. My great-grandmother's sisters woke up, and as they came out of their rooms, they saw the man leaving the house. As if in an inexplicable leap, he jumped over the fence. My great-grandmother was standing in the hallway, asleep, but standing. Her mother came out of her room with a rosary and a cross. She told them that that man had run after her, but that she had managed to grab her cross, that she began to pray. The man, upon hearing the sisters coming out to the room, ran away and jumped over the fence. My great-grandmother's mother very carefully took her to her room, since they say it's very dangerous to wake a sleepwalker. When she laid her down, she observed the bite marks she had all over her body, but especially the one on her neck where there didn't seem to have been a single drop of blood. The next day, my great-grandmother's mother went to the little mill in Naucalpan to see a lady who was very good at cleansing work and those topics. The lady was known as Doña Petra. Doña Petra accompanied my great-grandmother's mother to her house and talked with her, who told her some things, but did not mention her dreams. Doña Petra told my great-grandmother and her mother that, based on the bite marks and what they described, and especially the perfume that even she could perceive, what was after my great-grandmother was a vampire. Without knowing any of this, my great-grandmother asked Doña Petra, "Are you attracted to him, girl? Did you ask him to take you? Right? And you gave him permission to enter your house?" Then my great-grandfather remembered something. Something that seemed to have been erased from his head until that moment. He recalled that a few days earlier, she was arriving from buying bread and was entering her house. When she saw him for the first time, on the other side of the street, which was not very wide, that man, the man who smiled at her, he told her his name, a name that my great-grandmother never wanted to tell me. He asked her if he could have a glass of water, and she, as if she had known him for a long time, as if she trusted him, smiled at him and said, "Yes, come in. I'll bring it to you right away." She went to the kitchen for the water, but when she returned to the courtyard, he was no longer there. My great-grandmother didn't understand what had happened, but she closed the hallway and went on with her normal life. And she also told her yes, that she was ashamed, but that she felt a strong attraction to him, like an addiction she could not control, for she longed to be close to him. Doña Petra told her that vampires seduce their victims in order to take them away. My great-grandmother's mother, in disbelief, told her that she believed in witches, nahuals, but not vampires, but that she would do whatever she told her to do in order to keep her daughter safe. Doña Petra told her that if she did not follow the instructions, the vampire would eventually take my great-grandmother away. Then she gave her instructions on some plants she had to place in the courtyard, a special prayer she had to say every night before sleeping, and my great-grandmother also had to bathe with some herbs. She gave her an amulet that she had prepared specifically for her, which she could never take off, among other things. That night and the following ones, they could hear knocks coming from outside the hallway. My great-grandmother says she could hear them yelling her name, asking her to take off that amulet, to go out into the street, and she could smell that perfume, the scent she had become completely dependent on. She had to start sleeping with her mother because she would unconsciously get up sometimes, sleepwalk although not reaching the courtyard, and have attacks where she wanted to rip off the amulet. They were difficult nights, but after a few months, everything went back to normal. Doña Petra said that the vampire had moved away, that it was possible he would not come back, but that she should not stop doing what she had told them, and above all, that under no circumstances should she take off the amulet. And so it was. My great-grandmother complied. She never allowed it to be taken off, Little by little, she began losing her memory. She spoke less and less, but whenever she could, she would say that a vampire had wanted to take her away. At 99 years old, she was still taking sponge baths with those herbs Doña Petra had given her. Also in her house, in her courtyard, they would place the plants and follow all the instructions she had been given. In life, my great-grandmother never allowed her amulet to be photographed. She would say no, that it was not a game. So out of respect for her memory, we did not do so either when she died. My great-grandmother was buried, and the amulet with her. Some family members did not agree, but most of us said yes. Her coffin was filled with the herbs she would bathe with, and they wrote on a sheet of paper the prayer she would say every night before sleeping. Rest in peace, great-grandmother. In memory of her, I share this story with you. Thank you for reading me, and greetings to Uriel, whose program I have been listening to for years. Have an excellent night. Thank you for staying here, for continuing to listen. I really like these two stories. The first one is very simple, but it is an example of those that sometimes people don't dare to share with us. And that I ask them to do so because there is no small story. No story that is not interesting. And I really like the second one because vampires are not talked about much in this program. But wow, the stories are really interesting when they come to us. Remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single new story. We hope you continue to enjoy this episode. We continue. Hello Uriel and the whole community. I have been a fan of Tales of the Night for a couple of years, and it is now part of my nightly routine. I can't sleep without listening to a story. On this occasion, I am going to share mine. I have a couple of friends who listen to the podcast, with whom I have shared this story, and they have told me that I should have sent it in. I hope they recognize it if they get to hear it. I am from Nicaragua, and it is a small country where there are many legends that are also heard in other countries, like in Mexico. For example, the road where La Mona, La Llorona, etc. appear. And also one that I have heard several times, the one that I had to face. And that's because, you see, the protagonist of my story is a woman in white, an entity that I have already heard appear in many other stories. But that makes me doubt whether we all see the same woman in white, or if she is a representation of something nearby. It was 2001. I was 9 years old. From a very young age, I enjoyed horror movies, stories and tales. But I never thought that at my young age I would be the protagonist of one. At that time, my maternal grandfather was fighting a difficult battle against cancer, which he unfortunately lost. 2 years earlier, my great-grandmother had died of a heart attack. So we believed that sadness and loneliness were much more aggressive for him than the disease itself. We thought he just wanted to leave to be with her. During those last months of his life, his youngest daughter, my great-aunt, lived outside the capital. However, due to her father's health situation, she had to return. She had 2 children, a little girl and a little boy. When my great-aunt had to spend the night in the hospital with her father, the children would stay at a relative's house or at my grandparents' house, always accompanied by an older person. I have to say that that house is a bit strange. Nowadays, whenever you enter there, you feel something strange, something uncomfortable. And the closer you are to the back of the house, the heavier the atmosphere feels. I don't know if it's fear or anxiety or a bit of both, but it's not just something I perceive. Several people feel it and have even commented that something bad lives in that house. Some of my great-grandfather's grandchildren, cousins of my mother, took turns keeping watch over the house at night to prevent any thieves from doing their thing. My mother, of course, was part of that group. She had gone a couple of nights to stay there, and one day I insisted that she take me with her. I didn't want to stay at the house with my grandmother. She refused at first, but in the end I convinced her. and so we went together to spend the night there. I had problems with my sleep schedule. I always have. I'm more active at night, and I have a really hard time waking up in the mornings. That day was no exception. My mom is one of those people who falls asleep as soon as her head hits the pillow. That night, it was just the two of us. At that time, smartphones didn't exist like they do now, and while I was awake, my only company was my thoughts. I spent hours staring at the ceiling in the dark. We were in what was the main bedroom. The bed was queen size and was attached to one of the walls. I was lying staring upwards and my mom was asleep on her left side facing me. The hours went by and all I saw was darkness, and for a moment I started to worry, feeling or thinking that something would suddenly come out to scare me. Fantasies, I suppose, due to my age, but how surprised I would be, because that was exactly what was about to happen. I estimate it was between 2 or 3 a.m. when to my right, next to my mom, a light began to turn on very slowly. It was a bright white light. I think it took approximately 5 or 8 seconds to turn on completely. When it turned on, where I had initially only seen light, a woman began to appear. From her height, I assumed she was kneeling next to the bed, since I could only see from her waist to her head. She was next to my mom. She was white, and her skin shone as if with light. She was wearing a white dress as well, similar to the nightgowns women used to wear for sleeping. She had beautiful, very long black hair. She had bangs covering both of her eyes. I couldn't see them, but I can say she was very beautiful. It took about 5 more seconds for her to disappear, in the same way she appeared, but in reverse, slowly fading out like a light. I have to say it shocked me. I don't remember if what I felt was shock, but I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't even wake my mom. Minutes later, I was able to close my eyes, and I fell into a deep sleep until the next day. There, of course, I told my mom what I had seen. She looked at me a bit surprised and skeptical, since she says she prefers not to believe in this kind of thing, so she simply told me to forget about it. Shortly after, my mom and my great-aunt were alone in the same house. My mom was just visiting, so they were chatting. By then, my great-grandfather had been dead for a couple of months, and my aunt had returned to live in the capital. They were in the dining room, very close to that back part of the house, when they both suddenly heard a very familiar voice coming from the back, and it called my great-aunt by her name.
Maria.
My great-aunt reflexively answered, "Yes, Dad." It only took a split second for my aunt and my mom to recognize that voice. It was my great-grandfather's voice. They both stared at each other, thinking the same thing. It can't be. He's dead. At that moment, they abruptly got up from the dining room and ran out in the opposite direction, out of the house. I'm not sure what they talked about that day. It wasn't until years later that my mom approached me and said, "Daughter, do you remember the time you saw a woman in white at my Aunt Maria's house?"
Daughter, do you remember the time you saw a woman in white at my Aunt Maria's house?
And I told her of course I remembered. Then she told me the following.
When you wanted to come with me to take care of the house, I didn't want you to come. The previous nights I had stayed, I was fighting with the kids because every morning I would find things thrown around. The sink faucet left open dripping water. Other cousins also said something about the 4 rocking chairs that were on the porch. They said that during the nights one of them would rock. Just one, ruling out that it was the wind. Just one. As if someone was sitting there. And it wasn't until my next shift without the kids that I found the same mess. The faucet left open, the same in the morning, but now without kids. Who was I gonna blame if there was no one in the house but me? I wanted to think it was my grandmother visiting me and not worry about it anymore. until my Aunt Maria and I got scared a few months later, and we talked about it.
That day when they heard the voice that seemed to be my great-grandfather's, they began to open up on the subject. It was something difficult to recount, but even more difficult to omit. And my mom then told my great-aunt what I had seen. She, surprised, told her that her youngest daughter also spoke of a woman in a white dress, and she of course ignored her, believing she had made up an imaginary friend. Since in her daughter's description, she saw her standing, wearing cowboy-style boots. And after that conversation, my great-aunt began to investigate her family tree to see if there was any deceased woman there who matched a similar description. White, with long black hair, with photos of her wearing a white dress, or perhaps those cowboy boots. And she searched through old photos and older ones, and even older ones, until she found something. In the photos of my great-great-grandmother, my great-grandmother's mother, she was the only one who matched that description, or at least resembled it. They wanted to believe it was her, and many of us still think so. When I put all these pieces together, I remembered that I didn't feel fear or threat when I saw her. Surprise, yes, but I didn't feel I was in any danger. And in fact, I even fell into a deep sleep moments later. To this day, there are a couple more people who claim to have seen the famous woman in white in that house. They also continue to talk about that heavy, dark energy that is felt. I think it could have been my great-great-grandmother, and I have the idea that if she didn't cause me terror, if she didn't cause me fear at the time, perhaps she was just there to give me peace of mind. Perhaps she was just watching over us from the dark presence, which is felt in that house, in the back. From that which throws around the dishes, throws things around, and opens and continues to open the water faucets every night. Community, before you leave, let me tell you that we are very grateful for your response to this project, especially in the last year. We are thankful that more and more people are enjoying your stories, your tales, and there is only one true way to thank you: by working double. That means changes are coming for you, changes that may not be noticeable because they will happen little by little, because they will involve an attempt to improve the quality of the stories we share, and that's completely on our side. It's improving the writing, the editing of your stories. The commitment to you is more and better stories. In 2024, we will continue working to live up to this community, to live up to you. Thank you for listening, and perhaps now, you will be the next protagonist of Tales of the Night.